Three things I want to say before I kick off. Number one, as Mr. Jackman expressed to you folks, on behalf of my partner, Mr. Lakin and Mr. Bybee, I want to thank you folks. You were selected for a reason because we knew that you folks would sort through the mess that we've handed to you. And we appreciate that, and we thank you for that. It's kind of like taking a drink from a fire hydrant. All comes at you over 2 weeks. It's a lot of information. And we appreciate your folks dedicating your time, paying attention, diving into what we have presented to you. Number two, my comments about the evidence in this case, which are going to be many, is not in any way, shape, or form a reflection on how I feel about the prosecution. And I want to say that to you because at times I'm going to be very critical of the presentation of some of the evidence. But please understand, it is not my intent in any way, shape, or form to criticize these two folks. These are fine prosecutors. They've done it for a long time. They go about their jobs with integrity and professionalism. And I don't want you to think in any way, shape, or form I'm criticizing them. I am not. The third thing I'd like to say to you is, I'm in a bit of a quandary. And it's this. I'm presented with a witness, the key witness that stirs the whole drink in this case, Marcia Soul. She's elderly. She's frail. She garners almost immediately a bit of sympathy. And yet, I have to analyze for you folks her testimony and what she presented from the witness stand. And in doing that, I am going to be critical of her and critical of what she said. And please understand, it is not meant with disrespect because she is elderly and she demands a level of respect for the 80 years she's been on this earth. So, while I will criticize her, I certainly in no way, shape, or form mean to demean her. What you have, I guess as best I can describe to you, is somewhat of a mess. There are clearly facts that support what the prosecution says. There clearly are facts that support what the defense has laid out for you. As I said to you in jury selection, there are two sides to every story. And I didn't mean that in any way to demean anyone, but there are two sets of factors that go into things. And you have to weigh both sides. Because if you just hear one part of the presentation of the evidence, it could look bad. And I'll give you an example. Troy King. Troy King comes in here. He clearly says he has some serious animosity with Mr. Bybee because he got, in his mind, dragged into this thing. They took his truck, they took his phone, they interviewed him a number of times. He's unhappy. And he lays out for you what he claims occurred. That Mr. Bybee asked to borrow his truck, said he was going to go see a stalker. We have the time frames that he lays out. That sounds bad. If you just heard his testimony, you'd say to yourself, God, that's horrible. But what you had right after his testimony was the testimony of Bonnie Sutton, Michael Stinson. Eyewitnesses across the street, no dog in the hunt, no axe to grind. And the court certainly advised you in jury instructions, you're going to get to see him again, that what we say in closing argument is not evidence. If I say something to you folks that you collectively believe is different than what the evidence was, you're the ones that make the decision. You're the ones that matter, not what I say. And the reason I say that to you is because Mr. Jackman said that Ms. Souther and Mr. Stinson identified this truck. And this was Troy King's truck. In their testimony, unequivocal testimony, especially Mr. Stinson, he said, this wasn't standard wheels. This was a foreign truck. And it certainly wasn't normal wheels. So you look at Mr. Bybee's truck, side by side, and what jumps out to you immediately is that there's only one that has oversized, non-standard wheels, and that's Mr. Bybee's truck. Which means Troy King's truck could not have been, by the two eyewitnesses that identified it. That's what I mean by, you hear something, it sounds great, but then you got to compare it to the other evidence. They never saw this truck. Bonnie Souther said, as a matter of fact, that black truck that I saw it the next day when the police were there. Well, how could that be? We saw a truck with big, big wheels. There's only one of the two that has big, big wheels. So certainly, folks, they may have seen at some point in time Mr. Bybee's truck, because we know he was there, but they can't say that they saw it at the time period where all these events are alleged. Just cannot. That's the fact. That's what I mean by you have to sort through every piece of the evidence. Every piece. So here's pretty much a breakdown of the timeline. October 21st, we know that's the start of everything because Miss Soul threatens to kill her. We know on the 26th, she sends an email, and it's related to Mr. Bybee through Debbie Fossolino. You folks were handed that email yesterday, and you got to see it. That's Miss Soul reaching out to Mr. Bybee, despite the fact that she denied she did. From October 28th to December 28th is really the crux of what we have. It is the building of the friendship, the relationship between Mr. Bybee and Miss Soul, and that is all played out, as I said to you in opening statements, through the text messages. I strongly encourage you folks, take the text messages and go day by day. You will see an interaction between Marcia Soul and Frank Bybee that lays out exactly what their relationship is. Despite Ms. Soul's representation that I didn't ask him to do anything around the house, you're going to see in the text messages where she gives him a list. And she says to him that the list is building, Frank. Can you maybe get one of your other buddies to help us out? You will see throughout the text messages where she says, Frank, I'm never going to be able to pay you. I want to pay you. Stop refusing my money. Throughout the text messages, you will see her making those representations. I'm going to get back to you in a second on the December 10th text messages because there's some really interesting testimony that came from Detective Clay that's going to make all that clear. So from October 28th to December 20th, that's the body of the relationship. And it's all through the text messages. So you folks certainly have an opportunity to go back and take a look at them. They are in detail, and I would encourage you to do so. There's a lot. As a matter of fact, I believe there are 673 chats between Mr. Bybee and Ms. Soul. 673. That's an interesting analysis because if you remember Ms. Soul when she very first started her testimony. Question. You know Frank Bybee? Casual. Question. see him in court, I wouldn't recognize him if I saw him on the street. Question. You ever been to your house? Maybe less than once a week. That's how it started out. There is evidence replete in this case of deception. And it may, I suggest to you folks, go both ways. There's a whole bunch of fluff going on. There's a whole bunch of deception going on. There's a whole bunch of misrepresentation going on. You folks that have to make this decision cannot, in your deliberations, ignore it. Was it a casual relationship? Absolutely not. You believe for 1 second that she says she can't recognize him on the street? Absolutely not. You believe when she says, oh, well, you know, he barely came over once. 673 chats or text messages is going to show you folks all this. Can't deny it. So, December 8th and 9th, as we go down, you'll see that's when Tanya Thomas involved. December 20th is the D-Day. That's the day that Ms. Soul decides she's fed up with Mr. Bybee. She's going to ring the bell, she's going to call the sheriff's office, she's going to get him in trouble, and she's going to tell the sheriff's office that he's harassing her. You will see the text messages leading up to that moment when she calls the sheriff's office. I represented to you an opening that she says, if you're not here by 7:30, clean out the garage, fix my mailbox. I'm calling the sheriff's office now. Go ahead. You will see the text messages, one after another. 7:30 is coming. Please leave me alone. 7:30 is coming. Stop contacting. 7:30 is coming. So I asked her, Miss Soul, isn't it true that this is all over the fact that you just didn't? You wanted him to come and move your mailbox and clean out your garage. She didn't really give us a good answer. But that's really what it was all about. She had gotten so fed up that he moved her mailbox, wouldn't clean out her garage, wouldn't come to her location at 7:30. Understand, this is a person that she's claiming is harassing her. She's demanding that he come over, which is completely inconsistent. 7:30, I'm calling the police. Go ahead and call. She does. December 20th is really the start of the events. The deputy comes over, the sergeant comes over, talks to her. She said he's been harassing me, took money from me, I paid him for X, Y, and Z. And it starts working its way up the chain of command, because that particular deputy then refers it to her supervisor, Sergeant Legg. 21st, he gets an email and goes over to Miss Soul's house with Lieutenant Marshiner. They interview her. She tells him, same tale of woe. He's been harassing me. I don't want him in my life anymore. He wouldn't move the mailbox. He wouldn't clean my garage. I have proof of all that in my text messages. They look at it. They say, do you mind if we take this? We can download it. They do. And we're off and running. December 22nd, they notify Mr. Bybee, no more contact. Can't deal with it. They send that via email, telephone, directly. Can't have any more contact. December 27th, Internal Affairs is now involved. Sergeant Riley was right when he was having that conversation with Frank Bybee, and he said, hey, I don't want to be involved in this. It's probably going to go up to Internal Affairs. My guess is there's nothing going to come of it, but you need to know that's what's going to happen. December 27th, that's exactly what happened. Internal Affairs. Sergeant Riley, Warrant Trigger, they show up to Miss Soul's house on December 27th. December 29th is the Baker Act incident. And here's what I would say to you folks. Let's assume, for sake of discussion, that Mr. Bybee sent that in. He goes to the doctor. Doctor has to make a decision. What do? They contact law enforcement. Dr. Lerner very clearly told you folks, and I believe it was on redirect from Ms. Fraver, that there's times where he's sent law enforcement out for folks that potentially could be Baker Acts. But I don't make the decision. The people on scene interacting with the individual make the decision on whether that person should be Baker Act. And on this particular case, that's exactly what happened. It's exactly what happened. Because you heard the testimony from Deputy Day. He was there with Deputy Collison. He says, hey, we got there and she's kind of all over the board. And she first admitted she sent the email. And then she denied she sent the email. And she was back and forth. And then we got the doctor's office on the phone and she was calm. And then she got on the phone and she was screaming at the top of her lungs. She was irrational. When we told her, ma'am, we've got a Baker Act you, what did she say? If you do that, I'm going to kill myself. Well, folks, that's exactly what the Baker Act is for. Forget about the email. If you believe the state's presentation, fine, okay, so if he sent it, he didn't put everything else into motion. Deputy Day and Deputy Collison, they made an own independent decision based on what Marcia Soul was saying that day on December 29th. And they decided that she's a concern and she meets the criteria for Baker Act. Independent, completely unrelated to that email. But there's another level. They bring her in, she's Baker Acted, and the facility that she goes to has concerns. They obviously do because Baker Act, keep him for 72 hours, she got kept for 14 days and transferred from one facility to a psychological facility. And certainly the records will reflect this. But again, Mr. Bybee has no involvement in any of that. She is kept and evaluated and sent to another facility, all independent. Completely independent. If Frank Bybee had in fact gone himself, picked her up and took her, the Baker Actor, well, maybe that has legs. But in this case, there's so many folks that intervened to make that decision independent. That's why the kidnapping charge does not hold its weight, and the state hasn't met that burden. So, she comes home December 29th, January 11th. First thing she does, she picks up the phone and starts ringing the Sarasota Sheriff's Office. I want somebody here. I want guys in suits and shirts. Detectives. They send out 2 officers. Do not have to be these guys. Deputy Hammond, Deputy Harris. They walk in, she goes, I don't want you guys. I want the guys in the suits. Ties, shirts. They're like, man, we called, we asked for a welfare check. No, I didn't. I don't want you. But the interesting thing about that interaction is that she specifically says to Deputy Hammond, Frank Bybee trying to kill me. That's where we start and ramp up the whole issue that Frank Bybee tried to kill me. Deputy Hamill's testimony. Undisputed. They say, ma'am, you know, there's nothing we can do. We don't know who the shirts and ties are. We have no record of that. Sorry. They leave. She's not happy. She drops a voicemail to Sergeant Riley, 5:51 p.m., January 11, 2017. Sergeant Riley, I need you to come back. Frank Bybee had me Baker-acted, detained for 14 days. We really need to get him. We really need to put him away and be done away with. That's the message she left. That's the message she left. So we don't hear anything else from her after 5:51 until the next morning at 5:30-ish. She calls Mary Ann Dumbro. I've been attacked. Get over here immediately. Call 911. Miss Soul calls 911. Deputies arrive. Ballpark. 8:45. Or excuse me, 5:45. Close to 6 a.m. on the 12th. And here's the interesting aspect. We can show you folks photographs. We can speculate all you want. But the bottom line is 5 sworn deputies, 2 firefighters, EMTs, and Mary Ann Dumbro all walked into that home. Nobody else in this courtroom did that. You can show photos all you want, but 8 people put eyes on her, face to face. 8 people. And 8 people walked away and said, nothing happened here. Looks staged. No crime. 2 sergeants, 3 deputies, 2 firefighters, EMTs, and Mary Ann Dumbro. We can sit and pontificate all day long and give opinions and show you photos and tell you that these people didn't know what they were doing. But you know what? Those people were there. And those people came in and told us what they saw. Now here's the interesting aspect. There appears to be 2 groups of people in this case. There are the folks that I would call around the Bybee train, looking to run him over. And then there's the folks that didn't get invited out to the Bybee train. They weren't the cool kids. Sit with the cool group. And those people are folks like Sergeant Allen. Amazing. He came in and testified. He was on scene. There you go. And for whatever reason of what he said, all of a sudden he's asked to be treated as a hostile witness. Because he wasn't on the Bybee train. And then Sergeant Felix, treated the same way. Russ Reynolds, treated the same way. Deputy Butler, treated the same way. Firefighter Waltrip, treated the same way. You see, none of those folks provided testimony that was supportive to the theory of the state. So therefore, they weren't invited to the Bybee train. They were excluded. They were harshly treated when they testified, which should be a concern to you folks. Because you have to believe, by the way they were treated, that there must be some master, huge conspiracy in support of Mr. Bybee. Sworn officers, many of them, many years of service. 2 sergeants. I would suggest to you folks that it wouldn't seem likely that they would risk their careers to falsify information, but they provided you what they saw. They said they didn't see any evidence of crime. They did not see what Ms. Soul was selling, and therefore they were isolated. That should be a concern to you folks. So, there's folks that are on the Bybee train, there's folks that are off. And if you don't mind, let me go through a little bit kind of where we go. I typically don't like to review testimony when it's a somewhat short trial. May not seem like it was short. These 2 weeks probably have seemed like months, but generally speaking, it was a pretty quick trial, and you folks kept very good notes and were very attentive, so you know what the testimony was. But I want to point out to you some inconsistencies in some areas that you folks should be concerned about. So let's start. We started with Detective Gaeta, get back to her in a moment, but we started with Ms. Soul. I gave you the 3 leading questions of Ms. Soul, but the most important part of her testimony was she was as advertised. A lady who could be abusive. She certainly tried to sell you that she didn't use any foul language. We know better through testimony. Johnny Thomas, Marianne Dumbro, many other folks. But she wanted to sell you on the fact that she's just this little old lady that was victimized. And yet, most of her answers to the questions put to her by the state, she could answer. She appeared certainly to have a good memory. She rattled off her cell phone number in a flash. She could rattle off issues that occurred, things that happened, things she would remember, until she got pushed. Until she got disagreed with. And then the nasty side of Miss Soul came out, and she started yelling, I don't remember, I don't recall. Answering questions before the question, or answering before questions were even completed. She was arguing with everybody. I will tell you this, in the last 5 questions that I asked her on cross-examination, where I was pinning her down to what did you do for 2.5 hours when you woke up at 3 and you didn't call law enforcement until 5:30? She refused to answer. Her answer was, oh, you're being slick. You're trying to twist my words. No, ma'am, I just want to know what you did for 2.5 hours. That was a bad answer. She knew it, so she wasn't going to answer it. Okay, so after law enforcement left at 6:20, 6:30, and then Detective Gaeta didn't show up till 10 o'clock, 4 some hours, what did you do during that time? No answer. Wouldn't tell us. Despite the fact that she said, I took a shower somewhere in there, when I pinned her down on that, she yelled at me, I don't recall, I don't remember. She says, I took a shower and I still have blood on my fingernails and cuticles. Nobody's ever seen that. That's not part of the evidence. Despite her representations. She changed her testimony from the morning to the afternoon. In the morning, she said, Mr. Bybee grabbed a glass of water, brought it to her, she held it, and then he attacked her trying to shove pills down her throat. Well, I had all intentions of having her demonstrate that. Because physically, logically, it just didn't make sense. Smart lady. She knew it was coming. Question. So, Mr. Bybee brought you a glass of water? No. Didn't you say just this morning that he brought you a glass of water and asked you to hold it? No. You folks heard that. It's not me misrepresenting or representing the facts. That's what you heard. So you have to ask yourself, how did she go from saying, Mr. Bybee handed her a glass of water, and she held on to it, to now it didn't happen. Just like when Frank Bybee walked into my house, he was wearing nothing, no gloves, bare hands. Detective Gator, did she ever tell you? No. Always had gloves on. So why the change? Those are specifics that don't have anything to do with her mental health issues. Those are specifics that have directly to do with Marcia Soul manipulating everybody. She's the person who put this Bybee train on the track. She's the person who filled it up with gas. She may not have driven it, but certainly she's the one that got it started. And then when you really boil down what she tells you, it's not supported. It's not supported. She's all over the board. Yeah, there was blood everywhere, and Frank got a rag and wiped everything up on the floor and was wiping down the rug. Well, that's all important because I asked crime scene technician Jerry Wagner, "Did you see anything?" No. See any smeared in blood or any, you can do those tests for blood presence? No. See any blood or notice any blood on the rug? No. Did you test the glass? No. Did you swab a wine glass because Miss Soul said that Mr. Bybee was drinking from a wine glass? No. Well, Miss Soul said that she was taking pills, spitting them out, and dropping them in the wine glass. Did you test that for residue of potentially pills? No. I mean, step by step by step, folks. Somebody tells you a story, and you do everything possible to corroborate. And yet, that scene was missing a tremendous amount of analysis. I'm not saying to you folks that somebody was intent and evil and conspired to do that. It didn't get done. Mr. Wagner, who directs you on what to do and where to go? The detective? Detective, did you direct Mr. Wagner on what to do and where to go? No. Okay. That should be a concern for you folks. But clearly Miss Soul has a really good memory, and she exhibited that to you. We'll talk a little bit down the road about some of the other issues in the counts, but these are the counts. Attempted murder in the first degree. The court advised you yesterday of what's called lesser included offenses: attempted murder in the second degree, attempted manslaughter. There's jury instructions dealing with excusable homicide, excusable attempted murder. Folks, our position, and it's always been our position, is in order to get there, you got to believe Marcia Soul. And we're providing to you and pointing out to you many reasons that Marcia Soul can't be believed. Reasonable doubt is everywhere. The state has not met its burden on count one of attempted murder in the first degree. They have not. Because despite what Mr. Jackman tells you, you must believe what she said. Because guess what? There's no GPS that puts them there. There's no DNA that puts him there. There's no fingerprints that put him there. There's no eyewitnesses that put him there. There's no video surveillance from anywhere between his house and Miss Soul's house that puts him there. Not one. None of that is there. So how do you get him there? Miss Soul. That's it. Count two, kidnapping, has to do with the December 29th Baker Act that I expressed to you folks. If Mr. Bybee started it, there's plenty of people that made the decision that day that had nothing to do with them. They haven't sustained their burden in that charge. Burglary with a battery, same issue as the attempted murder. You have to believe Miss Soul. in order to convict Mr. Bybee of that. Count 4, exploitation of the elderly. That has to do, because you will see that in the charging document, it alleges exploitation of an elderly person, the date, December 29th, 2016. Mr. Jackson laid out all this other exploitation, irrelevant. That particular day, their allegation, through the charging document, has to do with the $65,000 in checks that were sent to the sheriff's office. That's what that county is. So what do we know about that count on the $65,000 checks? Despite the state's best efforts, if you believe the presentation, Frank Bybee, who was under investigation by the very sheriff's office that he was employed by, who was told to stay away from Marcia Soul, internal affairs investigation, they're all over him. He's going to send checks to himself, to the very agency that's investigating. In all due respect, folks, that doesn't even make sense. But the most damaging testimony about those checks came from Deputy Kay Trish. She's not on the Bybee trail. She's not one of the cool kids. She took a phone call and specifically talked to Marcia Soul. She came in here as best she could and told you what she recalled. She even made some notes. She was criticized. But she was emphatic that Marcia Soul said, Frank Bybee stole $65,000. Those checks are never going to cash. If Frank Bybee stole those checks, it just happened to add up to $65,000. She didn't send it, and she didn't do it. How does she know? You can't deny that fact. That should be raising all kinds of bells and whistles for you folks. Because guess what? From December 29th to January 11th, she didn't talk to any law enforcement. When I asked her who told her about the $65,000 checks, Karen Frazier. She didn't even matter on the 11th of January. And Detective Gata didn't meet her till the next day on the 12th. And she showed her the checks then. So how does this woman know about $65,000 if she wasn't involved? Well, we know there's a problem with that because the state put on their handwriting analyst. And I was a bit strong with the handwriting analyst because of this. She mentioned over 20-some times about simulations and tracings. Actually, her exact phrase was, there are indications of simulations and tracings. Over 21 times. And I said to her, ma'am, the only reason you're bringing that out is because the bottom line of your analysis, your final conclusion when it's all said and done, is that you can neither put Marcia Soul as the individual who wrote those checks or exclude Marcia Soul as the person who wrote those checks. You can neither put Frank Bybee as the person who wrote those checks, nor can you exclude Frank Bybee from writing those checks. So when it's all said and done through her testimony, bottom line was, folks, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, under oath, I can't tell you who wrote this. That would have been a smoking gun, but she couldn't give it to you. So she wasted an hour of our time hypothesizing about simulations and traces. But the bottom line was she can't include and she can't exclude either one. Oh, and by the way, she was only given a single check to compare as a known, even though Detective Gaeta could have gotten her hundreds of checks. You gotta ask yourselves, why is that? So this count, exploitation of elderly, count 4, specifically has to do with those checks. And the state has failed its burden by far. They did not prove that Frank Bybee wrote those checks. They did not prove that Frank Bybee mailed those checks. Remember, Jerry Wagner sent the envelope off to see who licked it? Nothing. Nothing. They didn't meet that burden. I'm sorry about that, but they didn't. Counts 5 through 14, fraudulent use of personal identification. 5 through 12 has to do with the ATM transactions. And by the way, count 8 is an ATM transaction, or excuse me, is a purchase of gas at a Sunoco gas station when there's no video. And how do we know that's not gas from Marcia Soul's car? He clearly was driving it, clearly with her permission. How do we know that? That's what I mean. It looks great, but when you peel it away, they don't support their burden of proof. In any event, counts 5 through 12 are all ATM or gas transactions of which it is clear, and you will see through the text messages, that Mr. Bybee had consent. And when you have consent to use someone else's information, that's not a crime. Look at your jury instruction, but that's required. Has to do it without Ms. Soul's consent. And I would represent to you from count 5 through 12, he clearly had her consent. Clearly. The state hasn't met its burden on those counts. So let's talk about count 13, 14. If you look at the date, count 13 is December 19th, 2016. That's when the state alleges that Mr. Bybee went into Ms. Soul's computer, changed information, IRA or all account or PayPal account. Well, folks, you heard testimony from Brett Thomas. You remember that young man who took the witness stand, laid out through what's called the CAD situation, or the CAD GPS system, where they could pinpoint where Mr. Bybee was every time. December 19th is now. There's no proof he was even at her residence on December. And the reason that's important is because Detective Clay didn't provide you, or Detective Bybee, who did the IP addresses. Nobody said to you that on December 19th, when there's this PayPal issue, that the IP addresses for the change of that information was linked to any IP address associated with the file. IP address testimony is great. Didn't have anything to do with count 13 or count 4. There's no evidence whatsoever that Mr. Bybee did anything in Ms. Soul's residence on December 19th. None. None. And if you really peel away and you look at the documents, which you folks are going to have access to, and you start looking at the information, it would have required Mr. Bybee to know about personal information, personal passwords, all those things. And Detective Clay said she never wrote anything down. So how's he supposed to know it? That particular count on December 19th doesn't work. Mr. Jackman said, he was in the area. Cell towers put him in the area. It's not the way it works. That's not the facts. That's not the presentation of the evidence at the state meeting. It is not. So now we get to count 14, December 28th. And if you look at the specifics, that has to do with Mr. Bybee using Ms. Soul's password to access her AOL account. Well, you folks will get a chance, and I went over this with Detective Clay, these 411 pages of alleged access to Ms. Soul's AOL account. And you will see that many of these are double counting. If you remember, I went over that with Detective Clay, where literally second by second, there's 2 entries, 3 entries. Detective Clay says, oh yeah, I do that all the time. Really? You folks can take a look at this. Page 85, page 345, just sample through it. I know it's 411 pages, but this speaks volumes, no pun intended, that it's just not possible. It's not possible. So now we get to 15, 16, 17, where the allegation is that IP addresses associated with Mr. Bybee accessed Ms. Soul's AOL account and sent emails. Detective Clay analyzed 5,900 and some emails. He analyzed in, out, sent, trash. He found Philomena Herrera's email in the trash. Certainly it is consistent with the way Ms. Soul speaks, despite her representation. She doesn't use that one. He never found anything about Dr. Werner. He never found anything about Mary Ann Dumbrow. And when asked of Mary Ann Dumbrow, is this email consistent with how Marcia Soul is? She said, absolutely. I didn't think anything of it. Marcia Soul's been trying to kill herself for 20 years. Didn't mean anything to me. No impact whatsoever. So then we get to count 18, which is another exploitation, or excuse me, another fraudulent use of personal identification. And the state has alleged that has to do with changing Ms. Soul's PayPal security questions and passwords. And the date they allege that is December 13th. December 13th. Well, you folks, through the testimony of Brett Thomas, told you the times, at least according to the GPS tag, that Mr. Bybee was at Ms. Soul's residence on December 13th. You probably don't necessarily recall off the top of your heads what that was. You folks can pull it up and take a look at it again if you wish. But what he says is the following. On December 13th, we tracked Mr. Bybee to Ms. Soul's residence. Can't prove that he went in. No indication forensically that it was done remotely. It's important. But here's what we showed. In the morning, he was at her residence for 2 minutes and 31 seconds. Enough to get out of your car, go inside, turn on the computer, log up, do anything? No. Then he was there for 3 minutes and 6 seconds. Then he was there, and they said it was a drive-by for 1 minute 2. And then he was there in the late afternoon for 21 minutes. Is there, in any way, shape, or form, an analysis that he did something at the time that the CAD GPS puts in there? The answer is no. No. Because Detective Clay, all due respect, that guy knows his stuff. If he could have put him there, he would have put him there. So this doesn't even fly on the banner of reasonable doubt. They have not met that burden. Proof beyond the exclusion of every reasonable doubt does not meet that standard. Does not. So let's talk for a moment about what we got. Sergeant Adam Caskey searched all the ATM videos you folks seen. Here's a unique observation, and you folks probably missed it, but there was one video that showed that Mr. Bybee went into Publix, did full shopping, then came out and used the ATM for $400. By the way, you will see the text messages from Ms. Soul that says $400. You heard the testimony from Tanya Thomas. Frank used my ATM card to go get $400. $400 is her MO. If Mr. Bybee was stealing the ATM to just siphon off money, could have used it for groceries. He didn't. He went and got $400 to put it in the jar for Miss Soul, as he was instructed to do repeatedly, as everybody that she was associated with was instructed to do. Here's something that you folks need to consider. Miss Soul, who brought Mr. Bybee into her life, state has a different take on that, gives anybody and everybody around her access to her ATM cards and her credit cards and her checkbooks. Everybody. And yet when I asked her, did you allow Frank Bybee, sheriff's deputy, someone that you were friends with, that you cared about, to use that? No. Well, we know that's just a complete falsification because Tanya Thomas specifically said so. We also know it's a complete falsification because if you look at the text messages, she tells Frank what to do. She gives Frank her PIN number. She didn't write it down anywhere. Detective Clay told you that. But she gives him her PIN number. So every time he goes and uses the ATM, he's not out on a spending spree. He's getting exactly what she wants. But again, you don't have to believe me. What financial analysis did the sheriff's office do to determine that Frank Bybee was pocketing that money? Their burden, their responsibility. What evidence did you see that Frank Bybee did anything with that money but return it to Ms. Soul? You go back there and you start deliberating and you say to yourself, I didn't see anything. So when he went to an ATM and he took $400 out, which is Ms. Soul's MO, what did he do with it? What did he do with it? That should be a concern for you folks. So Adam Caskey lays out for us all of the ATM videos, and he says, oh, by the way, there were a couple videos that we pulled up, and guess what? It wasn't Frank Bybee. It was a helper or someone who cares for Ms. Soul. And in one case, it was Ms. Soul herself. Sergeant Caskey, did anybody do an analysis or anybody pull all of the videos between Mr. Bybee's house and Ms. Soul's house? Yes, that was tasked by someone within my department, but we didn't get any surveillance video. In this day and age, folks, there isn't anywhere you can go where there's not a video. Not anywhere. And yet, there's not one video surveillance of any business, any property, any home, anything that shows Frank Bybee hopped in a truck, whether it be Troy King's, which we know it wasn't, or his own, or his wife's Tahoe, and went from his house to Marcia Soul's house. Doesn't exist. Why? Mr. Bybee that that devious that he went to every business and every potential video, camera, poll camera, traffic surveillance, and was able to manipulate all those? No. Which should scream volumes to you folks that it's not there. Sergeant Allen, not part of the cool group, not on the Bybee train, says he was first on scene, tells you what he saw, no evidence of crime. He was treated as a hostile witness. Detective Clay, as I said to you folks, long testimony, quality testimony. Talks about cell phones, cell towers, computers, iPhones, AOL, PayPal records. Looked at logs, analyzed, looked at AOL access. 411 pages worth. He reviewed 5,900 and some emails. That guy did some work. No doubt about it. But there's no proof whatsoever that Mr. Bybee entered Miss Soul's house and changed anything on her computer. He couldn't tell you that. He also was good enough, intellectually honest enough to say to you, hey, cell phone records are great, they give you a cone, but they don't put you at a specific location. Cell tower records can only give you an idea, but I can't tell you that through cell tower records, Frank Bybee was put in the house, or in the street, or in the driveway, or anywhere near Marcia Soul's home. So, cell tower records, it was great, he analyzed them, he laid them out, but he couldn't pinpoint where anybody was. That's just reality. So let's talk for a moment about these December 10th, 2016 chats that Mr. Jackman referenced to you were deleted from Miss Soul's cell phone. Gotta remember, you guys got two sets of iChats to look at. Mr. Bybee's, Miss Soul's. They're here in evidence. You can go back in the jury deliberation room, put them side by side. Flip them over on every day. See what's there, see what's missing. Clearly, there are 14 text messages on December 10th, 2016 that are missing from Miss Soul's iPhone. When did that happen? Detective Clay said it happened right after or shortly thereafter it was posted. Well, guess what? Frank Bybee wasn't with it. Frank Bybee wasn't anywhere near it. If you remember the testimony of Miss Thomas, she took Miss Soul to a facility that she was waiting for Uber. Didn't want to wait anymore. She took it. Not Frank Bybee. No access to her phone. And if you recall Detective Clay's testimony, this is critical. I asked him, are you saying that if you have an iPhone and I have an iPhone, I can remotely somehow go into your iPhone and delete text messages? He said, no, it's not possible. It's not possible. So the only way those text messages are deleted is by the user. And Miss Soul had the phone, and there's no evidence in this case whatsoever that Frank Bybee had that phone on that day of December 10, 2016. That's a huge hole. That's a huge problem for these people. That screams reasonable doubt all day long. You can't manipulate it. And believe me, if Detective Clay could have put him there to do that, he would have. You got to believe that. But he could not. Could not. That's a big deal about the iChats. There was testimony about searches, computer searches, history. They analyzed Miss Soul's iMac. And here's some interesting things. If you wonder whether Miss Soul is computer savvy, these numbers should astound you. 400 427,000 searches were done on her iMac. Most of which before she ever met Mr. Bybee. Through Safari. 427,000 searches. Only to be followed up by 32,000 searches through Firefox. Don't kid yourself, Marcia Soul was dumb as a fox. She knew what she was doing around those computers. She knew how to do things. She navigated her way through over 450,000 computer searches. You will see in the text messages that Miss Soul starts screaming at Mr. Bybee, "Where's my credit cards? Where's my keys? You SOB. You stole my credit cards. You stole my keys." He's like, "Marcia, no, I didn't. They're right where you left them. When you left with Tanya, I'll go by the house, I'll take photographs of it, I'll send them to you." Detective Clay found those photographs, by the way. But that allegation by Miss Soul is interesting because if you remember Philomena Pereira's testimony, when she got home on December 17th, 18th from the facility, she started screaming and yelling, "Bill, the landscaper, stole my credit cards. He stole my keys." It's the same MO, folks. It's the same drum that she beats time after time after time. And if it isn't Frank Bybee she's alleging it about, then it's a gardener, or it's Eloise Harris, or it's Tanya Thomas. You'll see in the text messages that she is absolutely blazing text messages to Mr. Bybee that Tanya Thomas must have stolen all this. But now she comes into the courtroom and it's Frank Bybee. That should concern you, folks. Detective Whedon talked about all the IP addresses. So let's talk for a second about crime scene tech, Jerry Wagner. Mr. Wagner clearly was doing the best he could, but he missed a whole bunch of stuff. He missed major issues of processing at the scene. He was supposed to dust for prints, swab for DNA, photographs, took a diagram. I told you the problem that he says, the detective directs me, and the detective says I didn't direct him, so somehow, miraculously, he found where to go, what to do, what to swab, what to test. But the bottom line is that he never DNA swabbed the wine glasses. He never DNA swabbed the vermouth bottle. He didn't see any blood smear on the floor or on the rug. There's no DNA matches or hits whatsoever on anything in that place. There's no print matches anywhere in that place. I'm sure the state's going to say, but he was wearing gloves. Mr. Jackman told you that. But even Mr. Wagner says the gloves don't necessarily protect you from a DNA transfer or a fingerprint transfer. He checked for DNA on the envelope, nothing. Swabbed the car keys, nothing. Checked for DNA and prints on the doors and the wheels of the vehicle in the garage, nothing. He never processed the blinds that Mr. Bybee supposedly looked out of. But probably one of the most critical issues, and this tells you why he's on the Bybee train and not one of the uncool kids, is he specifically was asked, when you send items off to the DNA lab and you fill out the form that makes the request, isn't it important that you not tell the DNA analyst what to do? He says, yeah, that's important. You don't want to taint them. You don't want to influence them in any way. Did you do it in this case? Oh, no. Well, here's your submission, sir. Let's take a look at it. Can you explain to us why you said to the DNA analyst, we need to find the suspect's DNA on this towel? He didn't have an answer. I said, that was improper. Yes. Oh, but I didn't say who the suspect was. Well, sure you did. Look at the top paragraph. Oh, well, I guess I did. I would submit to you folks that the pressure to bring this case upon Mr. Bybee was great and went to every level. All the way down to the crime scene technician, all the way up to the top guys who are faceless, that are the quote-unquote supervisors in this case. The pressure was considerable. So, crime scene analyst felt compelled to tell the DNA analyst, we need you to find DNA on this towel. So let's talk for a second about what that towel was. 5 deputies, 2 EMTs, and Ms. Dunbro arrive at 6-something on January 12, 2017. They look at the scene, and there's not one person that says, there's a towel underneath Marcia Sorrell's chair. And yet, when they come back at 10 o'clock, magically appears there's a towel. Magically appears there's a towel. That should be a concern for you folks. Because now Marcia Sorrell's saying, oh, collect that towel. He handed me that towel, and he told me to wipe myself off with it, and that towel's evidence. Okay, we'll collect it. Send it off. Maybe that's why there was the need to find Mr. Bybee's DNA on the towel. But it was never found. Never found. Ms. Slovacek, if you remember, she processed fingerprints. She didn't do the analysis, but she processed them. She took photographs of Ms. Sorrell, and I think the date was specifically January 17th while she was at Bayside. And here's what I would say to you folks. Here's a woman that's frail by everybody's description. Here's a woman whose skin clearly is impacted by any type of touch or trauma. And yet there is not one mark on her hands, on her arms, on her legs, on her chest, her ribs, nothing. This struggle, according to her, went on for almost 2 hours of fighting a man who's 185 pounds, who's on top of her, according to her, and she's fighting them all. And there's not a mark on her body. Not a mark. Because they did a full evaluation when she got to that hospital. You cannot deny that. So this is a woman who is in a life and death struggle, according to her, waiting for the white light. And yet, there's not a mark on her. Not a mark on her. And then Ms. Slovacek, in her photograph on January 17th, shows a aging bruise the size of a dime somewhere on her pelvis area. The size of a dime. 185-pound man who, according to Ms. Sorrell, had his knee in her groin and fighting him off for her life. That's all we see. That doesn't even make sense. Common sense. It doesn't apply. Brenda Vienna, FDLE, fingerprint. She followed up after Ms. Slovacek. You recall Ms. Slovacek did the print analysis, or did the printing, and then Ms. Vienna is the one who researched checks. She found a single right index fingerprint on one of 4 checks that she said was from Mr. Bybee. Well, folks, if you recall the testimony, anybody and everybody associated with Ms. Sorrell, certainly Philomena, certainly Marianne Dumbro, certainly Mr. Bybee, was asked on multiple occasions, go get my checkbook, grab me a check, bring me checks. It's not unusual or crazy to think that Mr. Bybee's fingerprint would be on a check. Interesting, it's not on all 4 checks. Interesting, it's nowhere on the envelope. But he clearly had access to all of her checkbooks. And you know that from the testimony, as did everybody else. Nothing smoking gun there. So she found a fingerprint. That doesn't mean he wrote it, because we know that when we get the handwriting lady, Keisha White. We've talked about her. Mrs. Bybee didn't tell you much. And the reason I say it didn't tell you much, because 8:30, 9 o'clock, he's supposed to meet Troy King. Here's something in the garage at 11-ish. He's in bed with her at 3. That would be damning. No alibi. It's not our requirement, not our burden in any way, shape, or form to come up with an alibi. All that would be really impactful if you didn't have Bonnie Souther, Michael Stinson saying that truck wasn't there. Tanya Thomas, longtime friend of Mr. Bybee. Somehow she got invited onto the Bybee train because she comes in, lays everything out for you. We picked up Miss Soul at the consulate. She was cussing, effing this, effing that, get the F out of my face. A little bit different than what Miss Soul was telling you. They got in her car. Mr. Bybee's driving. Miss Soul doesn't complain for 1 second that he's driving her car. No complaint. Asked about the dog. No issues. But she sees some concerns because Miss Soul is up and down. She's calm, then she's screaming. She's using foul language, and then she's okay. She takes her home, and the critical thing that Tanya Thomas says is that Marcia Soul orders Frank Bybee to take her ATM card and go get $400 so she can be paid. Also tells him to go get her food. And he goes and gets food from Morton's. Why is that important? Because Detective Clay made a big deal out of the browser history that Mr. Bybee had Morton's. Okay, well there's a reason he had Morton's. Because he had to go get it for Miss Soul. Nothing nefarious about that in any way, shape, or form. But Tanya Thomas confirms the consent issue on counts 5 through 12. Absolutely confirms it by saying, hey, she gave him his ATM card so he can go and get money. She's paid cash, $140 the first day. The second day she goes back by herself, told by Miss Soul, go to the cookie jar, pull out $160. Was there money left in the cookie jar? Oh yeah. She goes, gets her tooth pulled, comes back. Miss Soul needs to be driven to another facility. That's either the 10th or the 9th, but in any event, Frank Bybee's not there. Tanya Thomas lays out for you folks exactly the issues and confirms things that is completely inconsistent with what Miss Soul said. Did you ever let Frank Bybee use your ATM? Miss Soul, in a very nasty, direct attitude, no! But we just know that's completely false through time and time. Troy King, we talked about. Keely Robb, his stepdaughter, didn't really have anything to tell us. Talked to you about Bonnie Souther, Michael Stinson. Let's talk for a second about Sheila Stiles, because Mr. Jackman raised this issue. If you recall, she is the neighbor that is directly connected to Miss Soul. She comes out on the morning of January 12, 2017, and sees Miss Soul roughly at 8:15 in the morning. And when she sees her, she's at her gate. You saw the diagram. She had to come out her front door, walk to the gate that is heading then into her driveway. And she sees her and she notices blood on her and she's calling her name. Well, despite all of her accolades and whatever training that she has, isn't it interesting that when she sees Miss Soul and she sees her in that condition, she doesn't even call 911. There's no walker beside her. She walked all the way from the inside to the outside without talking. Don't be fooled that this lady can't get around. But she's standing out by the gate, and now she's supposedly bloody 2 some hours after the police leave, that the police never see, by the way. And yet she never calls 911. And Miss Soul never calls 911. And when I pushed Miss Soul, what did she do on 2 critical time periods? She woke up at 3, smelled, felt heat, found out the car was running, didn't call anybody until 5:30. That's a 2.5 hour gap. What did you do, man? Nope, no answer. They leave at 6:20, 6:30. Law enforcement, Detective Gator shows up at 10. That's almost a 4 hour gap. What did you do during this time period? No answer. But what we know definitively, folks, and you can see it from the photographs, how she looked at 10 o'clock is not how she looked at 6 o'clock. That should cause you folks great concern. How she looked at 10 o'clock is not how she looked at 6. So, talked about Sergeant Carrillo. Deputy Day made the independent analysis of Baker Act on December 29th. So let's talk about Mr. Lerner. Talk about Dr. Lerner, Dr. Ding. Dr. Lerner's known Miss Soul for quite some time. Long history of mental health issues. He's not a psychiatrist, he's not a psychologist. He did not put hands on or eyes on Miss Soul when she was taken to the hospital on January 12th. He did not see her until 8 days later on January 20th. He had formed an opinion about Miss Soul's mental status and about her recitation of what had occurred, only to be changed by what I would refer to as the conductor of this Bybee train, and that's Detective Gaeta. You see, Dr. Lerner says, here's my opinion, medical opinion from medical evaluation. She runs in and says, oh no, let me tell you some other stuff. Changes his opinion. Dr. Ding, same thing. He forms an opinion. Lo and behold, Detective Gaeta, no. Goes and meets with him, talks to him, changes his opinion. Why do you do that? Why do you do that? So Dr. Lerner talks about psychosis, talks about steroid use, but important things, 17 medications Miss Soul's on. But one important thing he says, when I asked Miss Soul, if you remember, ma'am, you ever been kicked out of any facilities? No. Are you sure about that? Yes. Nobody's ever told you you can't come back? No. Dr. Lerner, Miss Soul ever been kicked out of facilities? Oh yeah. How many? Multiple. The Pines, another one. For whatever reason, she becomes abusive, and they don't want her. Why would she misrepresent that fact? Dr. Lerner clarified that for us. He also clarified that Miss Soul has made suicide threats in the past. But more importantly, he said, you know, it's not for me to make that decision on whether someone's Baker acted. I rely on law enforcement who's actually putting eyes on her on the scene to make the final decision. Question, have you ever sent anyone or law enforcement to someone for potential Baker Act and law enforcement determined they didn't need to be Baker acted? Answer, well, yeah. I rely on them. And that's what he did on that day, because he was in Australia. Talked about Brett Thomas. Dr. Ding just confirmed the more issues as it related to the mental health issues for Miss Soul. So let's talk for a second about Marianne Dunbrook. If there is one witness in all of the parade of witnesses testified in this case that knows Marcia Soul better than anybody. It's Mary Ann. 25 years they've known each other. How would you characterize your relationship, both as a friend and toxic? She volunteered that she did not believe her that day. She volunteered that she relay that non-belief to law enforcement. She told us that Marcia Soul's been trying to kill herself for 20 years. She told us that she got the phone call from Marcia Soul at 5:30 in the morning, woke her out of bed, come over, call the police, I've been attacked. Shows up, garage door up, car running, she goes and turns it on. Goes inside along with law enforcement, views Miss Soul, views the scene, takes photographs, not large blown up photographs that are in front of her, but she sees face to face Marcia Soul and doesn't see any injuries. Showing pictures, how she was later on. Is this how she looked? No. Mary Ann Dumbro has no axe to grind in this case. She may not necessarily care for Miss Soul today, but she confirmed that Miss Soul has given her credit cards, given her checks, tried to give her and buy her with money, because that's Miss Soul's MO. She has a hard time maintaining friendships, so she thinks she can do that by winning people over by giving them money or access to money. Talked about Kate Trishler. Dr. Tishner was the Sarasota Memorial Hospital doctor who evaluated Miss Soul. She formed multiple opinions regarding the mental health of Miss Soul. She also reviewed the medical records of Miss Soul. She told us about bipolar disorder. She also told us about the borderline personality disorder. She laid those out in the medical records. You folks certainly are going to have a chance to see the medical records, and I apologize to you, but they are contained in that large FedEx box in the back. And the reason I tell you that is because the one thing the state really failed to do in this case is to lay out for you folks dates. There's no definitive proof that has been provided by the state of when Miss Soul came and when Miss Soul went from any of the number of facilities. It's just not there. You folks can sort through the FedEx box of thousands of pages of medical records. I'm not sure you're going to be able to sort through that yourself, but that was the state's obligation. If you're saying that Mr. Bybee was at her house and she wasn't there, then you have to prove that she wasn't there. And they haven't done that. Miss Wilson, the nurse, very quick and succinct. Her real issue was, hey, I did a fall analysis for Miss Soul. The chart of the scale goes up to 55, 55 being the most concerning, and Miss Soul was a 60. She was a high fall risk. A high fall risk. So now, if we can, let's talk about the deputies that came on scene that specifically were not part of the Bybee training. Reynolds, Felix, Butler, and of course EMT Waltrip. Let's start with firefighter EMT Waltrip. Here's a guy, again, no dog in the hunt, no interest. He's asked to go and do an evaluation. That's what he said, evaluation. He does. He is literally on top of Miss Soul doing the evaluation. Questions, oh, wasn't the lighting screwed? He goes, oh, I had a flashlight right in her face. Couldn't get better than that. And I didn't see the indications of injuries. Took her blood pressure. Miss Soul wasn't even interested in talking to us, that's what he said. was more interested in talking to the deputies. Did you offer her to go to the facility? Yes. Did she refuse? Yes. So here's a woman who, by her own statements, there was an attempted murder for hours. She'd been physically assaulted and harmed, blood everywhere, according to her, and yet, I don't want to go out. Took her blood pressure, checked her vitals, nothing out of the ordinary. Were there minutes. I would suggest to you folks that if, in fact, they determined that Marcia Soul had been the victim of an attack, the victim of a beating, there is nothing that would have kept them from taking her for an evaluation. But think about the allegation here, folks. The allegation was that she was beaten for hours, choked, tried to stuff pills down her throat, knee in the groin, and then she was, according to her, allegedly asphyxiated. And yet there's not one person who had any comment, notice, concern that there may have been carbon monoxide within inside that house. And here's what I would say to you folks. Don't get fooled by the whole carbon monoxide, no odor, blah, 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 blah. Anybody and everybody knows that when you smell the fumes of a vehicle, you smell the fumes of a vehicle. You may not smell carbon dioxide, but according to Ms. Soul, that car was running in the garage, into her home, for over 4.5 hours. Think about it. 4.5 hours, according to Ms. Soul. That vehicle is pumping in fumes, carbon dioxide, whatever you want to call it. Not one person noticed anything. Not one person had her evaluated for carbon monoxide poisoning. When she was taken to the hospital and she was evaluated and all the tests were done, blood tests, CT scans, whatever it may be, no medical information to lead anyone to believe that she suffered from carbon monoxide. How can that be? Common sense should scream at you folks that that just doesn't make sense. That doesn't add up. That is a problem for the state's case. Because it goes back to, as I said to you before, the absolute credibility of Ms. Soul. It's just not credible. It's just not credible. Deputy Reynolds, Sergeant Felix, Deputy Butler, they all were consistent with what they saw. They all left without anything. But here's something a bit disturbing that you folks, again, should be concerned about. Deputy Butler wrote the report. Once he sent it electronically, he was not allowed to go in and could not, in any way, shape, or form, go in and change his report. Unless supervisory individuals would tell him, I'm going to give you access, you can change something. If you recall his testimony, the only thing he was asked to change was his opinion. And yet, 2 additional reports were done where the allegation of what the crime was were changed. And he didn't do it. So who did it? Who would go in and change his report to reflect what the additional or what the allegations are? That should be concerning for you folks. He's clearly not part of the Bybee trend, but that is disturbing. So let's talk about Detective Gator. Detective Gator was the lead investigator in this case. And I will admit to you folks that she had a monumental job. The whole department's eyes were on the work that she did. Probably the biggest case she ever had. The most pressure she's ever had. And in questioning her about what she did, and more importantly, what she didn't do, in all due respect, I was surprised by the response. If in fact you are a detective who goes about your job and does everything correctly, there's no reason whatsoever for you to take a witness stand and be defensive. There is no reason for you to be condescending. Maybe it was the pressure. Maybe she didn't like somebody questioning what she did and didn't do. But she clearly had it at it. And when questioned about the things she did do and didn't do, she wasn't very nice about it. That's my take. You folks may have had a different take. But the question is, if in fact you are the deputy, you are the detective. You remember she got snippy with me because I referred to some people as detective and some people as sergeant. Apologize for that. There's no reason to be defensive whatsoever. None. Just get up and tell the truth. I will say to you folks, you heard her interview of Mr. Bybee, that it's important for her to do all the talking. Because if you listen to that interview, she does almost all the talking. Instead of attempting to interview an individual that she determined was a suspect and get 100% all of his analysis, she did a lot of talking. But then there's some very disturbing things that happen at Marcia Soul's house. She arrives at 10, she doesn't turn the tape on until 12:13. So for 2.5 hours, she's coaching Miss Soul. There's no other way to analyze that. None. What are you doing for 2.5 hours? Running through everything? Saying, oh, that, tell me that, but don't tell me this? Because then when you turn the tape on, it's like, okay, well, where do you want to start? Well, you want me to talk about the suffocation? No, why don't you start here? That's not, in the scheme of things, folks, that should be a concern. But then you're going through the interview, and the one thing that you never want to do is turn the tape off, because then it opens the door to say, what is it that was so important that you had to turn the tape off and you wanted to keep it secret? And her answer was, I don't really recall. Come on. She didn't miss a beat in her testimony. Until I asked her what happened when she turned the tape off, and now all of a sudden, oh. And then she jumps back in an hour or so later, tape comes back on, and now we're off and running on an additional part of the interview. That should be a concern for you folks. Question. You had the ability to go and retrieve all of the checks for Miss Soul as known writing samples to give to FDLE? Yes. Did you do that? No. I did handwriting exemplars. You ever done it before? No. Oh, but I gave a driver's license and I gave a social security card. Did you hear that from the handwriting analyst? That one of the known samples was a driver's license or a social security card? No. So how does that come up? She's the conductor of the Bybee train, so maybe there's that pressure. I don't know. But folks, when you're looking at reasonable doubt, that should be a great concern to you. As I said, in counts 5 through 12, 13 and 14, you folks are going to see the jury instructions that Judge Mason read to you yesterday. They're all the same. Every one of them is a repetition. You will see them when you go back and you have a chance to look at them, because you're going to be given the jury instructions. Each one of you is going to have your own copy. So as you go through the counts, you can pull up that particular jury instruction, see what the requirements are, see what the elements are, And you will see on all of those that consent is a critical issue. You will see in the elements, as I've laid out, for attempted first-degree murder, kidnapping, burglary with a battery, all those elements are laid out there. The bottom line is the state has the burden of proof. They always have. It has never shifted to us. So there's some critical things that I want to address with you. And I'm saying this not because I don't believe you heard it. It's only because I never leave this to chance. The state has the burden of proof. Mr. Bybee has no obligation to prove or present any evidence in this case. We did, but that didn't shift the burden to us. Judge Mason has advised you that to overcome the defendant's presumption of innocence, the state has the burden of proving all 18 of these counts with which Mr. Bybee is charged, and that he is the one who committed those crimes. The defendant is not required to present or prove anything. Whenever the words reasonable doubt are used, you must consider the following. A reasonable doubt is not a mere possible doubt, a speculative, imaginary, or forced doubt. So if you folks go back in the jury deliberation room and you start speculating or imagining what something should be or shouldn't be, that's reasonable doubt. That's not guilty. Such a doubt must not influence you to return a verdict of not guilty if you have an abiding conviction of guilt. On the other hand, if after carefully considering, comparing, and weighing all the evidence, there is not an abiding conviction of guilt, or if having a conviction, it is one which is not stated, but one which wavers and vacillates, then the charge is not proved beyond every reasonable doubt. And you must find the defendant not guilty because the doubt is reasonable. When you go back and start deliberating and going through the exhibits and talking about the testimony and the conflict in the testimony, you folks, if you begin vacillating and speculating, that is what reasonable doubt is. And when that happens, Mr. Bybee is not guilty.
Judge,
the court...
I'm going to object.
We're getting very close to the line of a misrepresentation of the,
yes, sir.
The law, sir. So bringing it back in.
The court instructed you that a reasonable doubt as to the guilt of the defendant may arise from three areas. The evidence, a conflict in the evidence, and a lack of evidence. Those are the three areas that you folks look to. There is tremendous conflict. And I've pointed out many areas that show that conflict. There is tremendous areas of lack of evidence. And there is considerable evidence in this case that creates reasonable doubt. In weighing the evidence in this case, there's some factors that you folks are asked to look at. Number one, did the witness seem to have an opportunity to see and know the things about which the witness testified? That applies to many of you folks. All of the officers that were there that morning, Ms. Soule, Bobby Sounder, Michael Stinson, that applies to almost everyone. The other item that you consider is, did the witness seem to have an accurate memory? That again applies to just about it. Another consideration is, was the witness honest and straightforward in answering the attorney's questions? Well, that was a big problem for Ms. Soule. Big problem. That's one of the considerations, folks, that you have to determine in determining the credibility of the witnesses. These items the court gives you. Number 5. Witness's testimony agreed with the other testimony and other evidence in the case. I pointed out a number of areas where there's clear conflict. And lastly, did the witness at some other time make a statement that was inconsistent with the testimony he or she gave in court. We pointed out a number of areas of Ms. Soul. She testified to X, and previously she had said Y. That's part of the consideration that you folks can give in determining the credibility of witnesses. Now here's what else it says. You folks and you folks alone can determine who to believe and who not. You folks and you folks alone can determine what portion of a person's testimony is credible or what portion of a person's testimony is not. You have that complete obligation. This jury instruction just gives you a guidance on what to look at, what to consider in making that determination for each and every witness. And that's why I pointed out, and that's why it's important. I'm coming to the end, so you're happy about that, and what I have to say to you folks. I only get one opportunity, and certainly when I'm through, the state has the ability to get up and say, well, everything he said is a bunch of bahooey. But I will tell you this, the state has a very serious obligation of proving someone's guilt or innocence beyond a reasonable doubt. I've gone through with you the multiple counts and giving you a very clear roadmap of why Mr. Bybee should be found not guilty on the multiple counts that he is charged with. Despite what the state is going to represent to you, you have to believe Ms. Soul to get to the attempted first-degree murder. You have to believe Ms. Soul to get to the burglary or the battery. I've given you the clear reason why kidnapping does not apply and the state has not met its burden, as well as counts 5 through 12 with consent, as well as the complete lack of evidence as presented by the state for the other counts. That is the roadmap for you folks in determining the guilt or innocence of Mr. Bybee. When you go through the analysis and you go through the records, and unfortunately it's going to be a bit painstaking for you, but that's why we selected you folks collectively. You will see that the state hasn't met its burden. You're not allowed to have bias, sympathy, prejudice one way or the other. You may not like Mr. Bybee, but the fact that Mr. Bybee befriended Marcia Soul wasn't and isn't a crime. The fact that Mr. Bybee took $1,000 to care for her dog wasn't and isn't a crime. The fact that Mr. Bybee did things for her around the house and fixed her car and was paid for that isn't and wasn't a crime. His friendship with Miss Soul was not and is not a crime. The state has not charged those aspects as criminal conduct. And I say that to you folks because I don't want you to think, oh, well, you know, Bybee befriended her, that right there was something wrong. That's not true. Was it probably not the best decision to befriend someone with multiple mental health issues? Yeah, I don't doubt it. Common sense tells you so. But that doesn't make him a criminal. And you can dislike him all day long, but you still have to apply the law that says the state must prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. And they have failed in multiple areas to do that. Multiple areas. I apologize for being a bit long-winded, and I appreciate your folks' attention and directness that you've given to this case. It's a difficult case. It's a mess. But we selected you folks because we believed you could sort through this case and provide a just and fair verdict. And that just and fair verdict in this case is not guilty. Thank you.